Alrighty, I think we're live. Let me do a quick double check. As I go here. Click here. Alrighty, we're live. So, today we are going to be talking about the physical qualities that you need to train as a referee. Let me fix this. Alright. So, sorry, I was getting a little bit of feedback there. Today I'm going to be talking about the physical qualities that you need to train as a referee, but also just as any athlete trying to compete. It's really important that when you are that when you are training, you have in mind the goal that you want to achieve with each exercise or with each thing that you do. And realistically, there's a bunch of things that fall outside of the qualities that we need to train. And a lot of those exercises will just be garbage that you see on the internet or that you hear from other people that, you need to be doing balancing on your head in order to be a better referee or better at your sport. Whereas realistically, what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to achieve productive training that moves us towards our goals so that one, we don't waste time, but two, we actually move towards those goals. So today we're going to go through a few of the different physical qualities that you talk about. We're going to go through overall overarching structure, and then we're going to, for each quality, kind of break it down into what it actually means and what it looks like in the gym, on the field, all that kind of stuff. Let's get right into it. So first up here, these are the 4 qualities that we need to be thinking about for athletic performance. Now, when we look at this, it's not, these are all overarching and there's a lot of things that fit within here, but it's really important that we understand that everything comes back to these 4 things, okay? So, for starters, our first one that we talk about is our loading capacity. So loading capacity is essentially referring to the physical structures and what you're able to tolerate, what you're able to withstand. And this is important not only for our training, but also for our sport, because if from a training perspective, if we have a higher loading capacity, then it's going to mean that we are able to train more often and have more attempts at developing our skills, whether that is training in terms of like our physical aspect, a lot of the stuff that we deal with here, but also in the aspect of getting out on court more often, doing more games, all that kind of stuff. And then the other thing that it's going to improve with is on game day, where not only does it improve from like a macro perspective of if you're less tired, you're more refreshed, then you're going to be better off for the game. But also within the game, you're going to be able to perform better at the end compared to other people who have a worse loading capacity. So loading capacity is something that we want to improve over time. The next thing is force capacity. Now, when we have this word capacity, it obviously just means how much you can essentially do something. Force capacity is now more about how much ability to produce force we have. Okay, so what that essentially is talking about is our hypertrophy, or how much muscle we're able to have. The other side of it as well is where we might be able to produce a certain amount of force, but if we've got a bunch of stuff that we're pushing against, which is essentially like our body, our mass, then we're going to be less effective. So if you're only able to produce 100 newtons of force and 80 are needed to hold you up just because of how heavy you are, then it's going to be beneficial for us to maybe make that number 60, whatever it is. We'll go into a little bit more depth in a minute. Force production is our next one. So now that is how much force we're just able to produce. Now, this isn't just based on like strength and like how much muscle you have. There's a reason that force capacity and force production have been separated. Force production refers to how well we're able to make use of that muscle that you have built and the capacity that you have to produce force. So, for example, what you might have seen in the past is like really, really skinny guys lifting really big weights. And that is because even though they might not necessarily have as much muscle as somebody else, as much like raw muscle, they are really, really good at recruiting that muscle to do a task. And that includes your brain being able to send enough signals. It includes all of your neurons being able to send those signals where they need to go quickly and efficiently, without losing much like strength. And then it relies on your muscle to then action that. So it's not just about the size of the muscle, but it's also everything within the muscle that lets it actually action. And then skill and economy are now that top end of how well are we able to move. And skill is going to be a lot of the stuff that affects necessarily like how quick we get moving or that kind of stuff. Whereas economy is how are we able to change our technique so that we're able to continue that performance for a longer period of time. So this kind of stuff here is essentially, when we develop it well, somebody who has the same amount of force production, somebody who has the same amount of force capacities, somebody who has the same amount of loading capacity, let's say that we just duplicated 2 humans, the person with more skill and more economy is going to be able to take advantage of these 3 things really, really well. So essentially, when we are looking at developing somebody's athleticism or just how well they're able to move, you can decide on targeting any one of these 4. And ideally, in a good program, you should be targeting at least 3 of them at any one time. It's fair enough to say that you might not necessarily have all 4 in a program at certain points of the year. If you can, that's great. And a lot of my programs that I run, I aim to do that. But if you're not having at least 3 of them in there, then you're kind of missing the mark. And especially these first 3, they are all very similar to train. So I don't really see a reason not to have that. The skill and economy one is probably the first one that gets out of people's programs or doesn't even get put into it, especially when you're starting out. And I think that it's something that is missed often, when it shouldn't be, because it can make a really big difference. So those are our 4 qualities. Let's go into loading capacity first. So when it comes to loading capacity, essentially what we are talking about is our body's ability to tolerate the things that we want it to do. So here we go. Oh, it's actually going to do this to me again. So yeah, it's our body's ability to tolerate the different things that we want it to do. The reason that that's obviously important is because we have a lot of things that we want to achieve. All right, we're back. So our body's ability to tolerate. So what that might look like is things like our tendons, our ligaments. It might be the amount of contractile fibers. So how many muscle fibers that we have that can actually move, create movement. It could even be thing like our cardiovascular health. And then just like general health as well. So this is essentially the base of our performance. Now, the better the loading capacity that we have, as I said earlier, the more often that we're going to be able to train without seeing a reduction and having excessive fatigue. But also the quicker that you're going to be able to recover, meaning that you're going to be able to get back to performance quickly. Now, it's really important to note that things like injury, they affect this level. They are specifically hurting this level, and as a result of hurting this level, everything below that, all of those other qualities that we're going to talk about in a minute, they then fall off because this level has been tampered with, essentially. So when we're looking at like injury prevention, which is a tricky term, but it describes what we want. When we're looking at injury prevention, this is what we're trying to address. Now, injury prevention doesn't just mean, and why I say that it's a tricky term, it doesn't just mean that you're doing like clams and like glute bridges, right? Your strength work is still going to address here, right? But we need to have this in mind, because the better that we get in all of these areas, the better that we're going to be able to develop the other ones below it. So the things that we need to look at for this is we need to have some level of our strength training. We need to have some level of power and like plyometrics and speed for our tendons and our ligaments. We need to have some sort of cardiovascular health is important for this level. So having some sort of like cardio base. And then we need to just make sure that we maintain our general health. Yeah. Do things that won't make you feel unwell. And if you address all of those things, then your loading capacity is going to increase. That is the main crux of this level. If you address this well, then everything else can follow along with it. But yeah, the good thing about this level is that you can address it mainly through the same things that we address all of the others. The main thing that I want you to identify here is that sometimes things outside your direct goals will need to be done to address this. So what this necessarily means is that if my goal is to purely just improve my takeoff, my first 3 meters, it might mean that on the track, I'm focusing really, really heavily on acceleration. It might mean that in the gym, I'm going to work a little bit more anterior chain, a little bit more quads, and I'm going to be very explosive in my movements. If I want that to be the focus of my next block, all of the things that aren't that, they then become addressing this loading capacity and maintaining that. Okay, so let's say that we have a focus on improving our quad strength, whether it's because of injury or because of just performance goals, you think that's what's holding you back, then loading capacity, all of a sudden, our injury prevention might be a little bit of hamstring work. Yeah, it might be just some long lever hamstrings or something like that. And if you're doing things well, you should be able to find a way to minimize the amount of time that this takes up and minimize the amount of work that this takes up while still getting development and while still having some level of this loading capacity maintenance or improvement to reduce the chance of having that injury occur. So sometimes the biggest thing to help develop your loading capacity is to think outside of the direct goal that you have to be developing right now, because otherwise this is the stuff that gets left behind. If you don't focus on your hamstrings at all for a block, then you're gonna be on struggle street pretty soon. So that's loading capacity. Then once we've developed our loading capacity, once we have that base level of loading capacity, we can then start to look at force capacity. So force capacity, as I said earlier, is essentially the raw tools that we need to develop to produce more force. So the tools we need to produce more force, which is important. It is also known as muscle, and it is also known as brain. Yeah, so very simply, it is the amount of muscle that you have. It is the amount of ability for your brain to send signals to the muscles throughout. Now, can we do very much about brain? Yeah, maybe. You can do it by practicing all of these like power skills, and like you will get better neuromuscularly. But there's not much that we can do specifically for that it doesn't relate to our force production. So we're not going to focus on it too much. There's probably like some medical stuff that would be beneficial here or whatever, but I wouldn't really buy into too much of it unless you specifically have some sort of deficiency. And I don't really know enough about that, so I'm not going to talk on it. But it could be a factor. The main one that we're going to talk about is muscle. And when we talk about muscle, we're talking about hypertrophy. Now, earlier I gave that example of the really thin guy that can lift a lot. It is not to say that if that guy got bigger, that he wouldn't be able to lift more. Yeah, because from a physics perspective, we just have more fibers that are able to contract and get shorter. Which would technically allow you to produce more force. But if he did not then learn how to use that extra muscle, then it doesn't necessarily mean that he'll be stronger. Which is why the bodybuilders or people who have the most muscle mass aren't necessarily always the strongest, but also we see that trend of the bigger of a human you are, you probably are going to be able to lift more weight. And that's why, as you look at weight classes in sports like weightlifting or powerlifting or any sort of strength sport, if you look at those weight classes, obviously bigger humans are shifting more weight. They're getting higher numbers. So that's where what explains that relationship exactly. But when we look at muscle and what we're actually doing by increasing the amount of weight or muscle fibers that we have, is we're giving our body more sarcomeres to contract. So essentially what a sarcomere is it's one like unit of muscle, right? And it's got two filaments that work across, right? And then you got a bunch of like little hands here. So essentially the way that this works is that this is one unit of muscle. There, beautiful drawing. Now, this might be at like a middle length, right? So just like natural length where you're probably going to be strongest, yeah? So most people are going to be strongest about here. Now, the reason that you are strongest in that like middle range is because you have the best crossover of the actin and myosin, so actin, myosin, to actually pull and create a contraction, right? So what happens is when we contract, if we have this same thing, I'm not going to draw all those little hands. When we contract, that is what the sarcomere looks like. So it has gone from this length, come together, yeah? And when we lengthen, we have very little crossover. So that is it coming back out. One of these, you can get stronger, but if you have lots of them, then each of them only need to be a little bit less stronger. So let's say that this is able to produce 1 Newton. Then the more of these that you have, the more 1 Newton lots that you have. We are trying to develop in this quality, we are trying to develop the amount of chances that we have to produce force, essentially. Whereas if we then go over to force production, this is now our qualities that are involved in improving our ability to produce force. And that is both in terms of amount / speed. Yeah? So our qualities that we're going to see here are going to be our strength, they're going to be our power, and they're going to be our speed. These 3 qualities are going to be the bulk of what we look at here, and they're going to be the bulk of what we're trying to achieve. Let me grab a quick drink. Now, if here we're just concerned with producing the amount or having more chances to produce force, here we are instead trying to increase. That's bad. Go here. We're trying to increase the amount of force that each sarcomere is able to produce. So this might be 2 newtons. Now, if I've got double the amount of newtons that is able to be produced from one of my sarcomeres, that means I technically need half as many sarcomeres to produce that force. So by improving our strength, we want this to get as high as we can. That will allow us to have a bigger ceiling. So capacity is improving our chance to actually build all of these skills, build all of these qualities. Our force capacity is going to be how many chances we have to produce force. Our force production is now how well we can make use of this. So strength we can improve by just having more, by having our sarcomeres be able to produce more force. And power and speed, they are involved in how quickly we can produce this force. So we're gonna run a quick example of this. So let me bring this guy up. So essentially, what we are trying to do, this is the wrong one. Let's go here. If we go here, might not be able to bring it up. Essentially, I'll draw it instead. Essentially, what we are trying to improve is how quickly we are able to produce force. So a typical force graph might look like that. Yeah. So this is time. And this is force, or newtons. A typical graph might look like that. Now, if we're trying to be able to be more powerful and more speedy, more quick, we want to be able to produce that force more quickly. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to get this to get up here quicker. Yeah. Our top number will still be the same, but our speed to get there is going to be better. Whereas then if we're working on our strength, if we go back to that quality, we might still produce, let me go a different color. We might still produce force just as quickly, but we might max out a lot later because we're going to get up more force. So strength is the maximum amount of force that we're able to produce. Power and speed is how quickly we're able to produce that. Strength is going to be a lot more related to our muscles and how well those sarcomeres can pull together. And then also how much signal our brain is able to send to our muscles. Power and speed is going to be about how quickly and reliably our brain is able to signal our muscles. It can also have to do a bit with the type of muscle fibers that we have. So you have something called type 1 fiber, which is your slow fiber, and you've got type 2, and you've got type 2. Sometimes what you can see is that as somebody trains speed, is some of those type 1 fibers are able to actually reorient themselves to be a fast twitch fiber. So there is an element of muscular when it comes to power and speed, but it's probably not as big of an element and as common of something to improve. So that's how we develop those. It's speed, and that is what it actually helps you with. So that's our force production. That is how much force we are able to produce. Our last one is going to be our movement skill and our movement economy. So essentially what we are talking about here is we are talking about improving our ability to move in space. Now, when we talk about our ability to move in space, skill is about like our execution, or like how well, or not necessarily even just how well, but execution and like speed. How well we're able to apply force. And then economy is about how well this makes use of energy. Let's talk about economy first. So economy is how well you make use of energy. If you have better movement economy, then over a period of time, it's going to require less energy to be able to actually go out and move, right? So if we go a different table here. Oh, that was a bit rough. Let's go here. let's go there. All right. So this again is time. And then this is amount of movement. Movement. Let's just call it movement. Move. Cool. So this might be how the average person goes. And then economy, and then this is like their wall. Bang. Right? So this might be the total amount. Now, realistically, you're not going to go exactly down like that. Let's get rid of that line. You're then going to start, whoa, that is not what I want. Delete. Realistically, you're not just going to fall off a wall. You're then going to like start going down in terms of how well you move. So this might be how long you can maintain a 5-minute pace when you're running, right? If we improve our economy, then it is going to take less energy, let's say still at that 5-minute pace, it's going to require less energy for us to get here. And then after that, we're then able to take that same drop. Yeah. So movement economy reduces that slope of how long it's going to take you to essentially wear down, how fatigued you're going to get. Yeah. And that is purely based off of skill. That is not based off of endurance or anything else. Whereas skill is going to allow us to apply this a lot quicker. Yeah. So we're going to be able to apply that force a lot quicker in a way that is going to get us moving quicker. Yeah. So all of a sudden here, we're probably going to be moving a whole lot faster. So skill can come down to like our sprint technique, or maybe even like your change of direction technique and all that kind of stuff, depending on how many change of directions you have in your sport. In refereeing, that's just like literally like your turnarounds, right? Like you get to one end of the court, ball turns over, how quickly you can hit the brakes, decelerate, and then accelerate again in the other direction. But it could be a sprint, so how well you're able to apply force to actually get moving. Now remember, regardless of if you have the same loading capacity as somebody else, regardless of if you have the same force capacity as someone else, regardless of if you're able to produce the same amount of force as somebody else, the better the skill, the quicker you're going to be able to get moving. The better the economy, the longer you're going to be able to keep on moving. So this is all stuff that we can look at and actually develop continuously over time, technique-wise, so that you can continue to take more of an upward trajectory. If you can develop this while still developing the rest of these, then you're actually going to be in a pretty good spot, and you're actually probably going to see pretty good gains for a pretty long time, rather than it kind of dropping off once you start to slow down progress in terms of the other physical capacities that take a little bit more time to develop. Outside of this, there isn't a lot to it, right? Now, those have obviously a lot of elements within them, but the thing that I want you to think about here is that we didn't necessarily really talk about flexibility. We didn't necessarily really talk about just like mobility or what we're doing with that. We didn't talk about balance. Now, each of those can be things that can affect your performance, right? Especially when you have impairments in them, right? So somebody who is very, very, very below the average amount of flexibility or doesn't have good balance and coordination. All of those are things that we can work on and we can improve over time. However, they are kind of more reserved for when, as I said, there is an impairment in it or it's significantly holding you back, right? These other 4 areas, no matter what, we're able to improve them, and no matter what, improving them should translate in some sort of a way to your performance. Now, you might get to the point where adding more muscle isn't going to benefit you, or adding more strength isn't going to benefit you. But it's because one of those other elements are kind of lagging behind, right? So if I am as strong as I need to be, but I haven't sprinted for a year and a half, I'm probably not going to get faster by just adding more kilos to my squat, right? Because I've been squatting. Yeah, I already have a max force that is well above the speed that I'm able to produce it to. I just need to work on getting this speed, this power closer to that ceiling. So, but in general, having each of these qualities, they still interplay really well together. It's just more about how much effort you're going to be putting in for how much reward. Whereas balance, once you achieve a certain amount of balance, realistically, you don't actually really need to work on it again for athletic purposes. So that is why I haven't included those things, and it's not to discount them. And there are times where I have included those and many other qualities in my clients' training, but it's just not something that I would blanket recommend for everybody to focus on. Whereas these four here, realistically, especially if you're on this video, it means that you're looking for something to improve. Then these four things right here, they're going to be productive for you to work on and improve. That's all that I really have to talk about with that today. It's really important, as I said, to focus on all four of those. I've got a heap of videos on this channel talking about the different ways that we can develop each of these. So make sure to have a look through and see if you can learn any of that. If you have any questions about it, if I don't currently have a video that addresses something that you're thinking about with regards to this, then reach out, leave a comment down below, or reach out via my social channels, and I'd be really excited to actually answer your questions. Other than that, thank you very much for hanging out. Check out another one of my videos, but I'll